All right, Bruchim Aboyim, welcome everyone. We're about to begin Bezos Hashem Yisbarach, our sixth and final lecture in our sixth lecture series on magic and Judaism. And we've gone through many different aspects of magic and Judaism, both Jewish magic and not Jewish magic, and all different manifestations of magic, practical Kabbalah, forbidden forms of sorcery, kishuf, etc. And so I'd like to make a brief overview and make a conclusion and also offer some suggested further readings and so forth if you're interested in this subject and in learning more. So we first of all used certain words, Jewish words. So we defined various terms because the truth of the matter is this word magic, it's not a Jewish word. The source of the term magic, of course, comes from the magi, the mage. It's a Persian term from the ancient Zoroastrians, but it's a word that's been used in our parlance for a long time in the Western world, and seems to be a fair definition of various practices, both certainly prohibited practices. There's no doubt that there are forms of what we would call magic that are absolutely not kosher in Judaism. And then there are forms that, depending on who you ask, may or may not be permitted within the Jewish milieu. This being the pluralistic yeshiva, it's interesting to note how this manifests outside of Orthodox Judaism, because quite often one of the oppositions that some of the heterodox movements have had to the Orthodox community has been these practices. In essence, a reformation of Judaism, the Reform movement, and the reconstructing Judaism, or what was known as the Reconstructionist movement and became known as reconstructing Judaism. These movements often were seeking to rid the Jewish world of anything that was not essential. That would be the ideal in these movements, in their approach to why they would leave the Orthodox community. Often, in earlier days, Reform rabbis would compare the Jewish Reform movement to the Protestant Reformation in Christianity. And so too you would see in both of these movements something that would initially elicit an approach to rationalism, going away from many things that are mystical and going away from many things that might be considered superstitious or corrupt. However, on the other hand, it's known that, of course, within Protestant Christianity, there did develop mystical movements and things that go back, trying to recapture some of the ancient or original ways. For the most part, Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism in general try to eschew and remove themselves from any types of superstition, and yet in this time there was this call back to classical, Kabbalistic, and even magical practices, as well as just the general vestigial approaches all throughout the Jewish community and throughout Jewish history of what you would unriefen ababa maisa, right? You know what that means? An old wives' tale, a grandmother's tale. That with these types of magical practices, that generally did remain within certain communities, certainly were popular even outside, even among those who had left Orthodoxy, still maintained a lot of their superstitions. On the other hand, there's also movements, obviously, away from the Jewish community that were considered heretical and even dangerous or satanic cults, although they attracted a large amount of followers, and at a certain point, certainly the Sabbateans attracted quite possibly something close to the majority of the Jewish communities, were at least interested or curious or had an idea that perhaps Shabtai Tzvi was the Mashiach, was the Messiah. And of course, that didn't happen. Now, he wasn't particularly a magician. He was more of a traditional Lurianic mystic. However, obviously, he engaged in practices that were antinomial, and even more so, the Frankists were extremely antinomian, to the point where it seems that certain magical practices may have influenced these groups in a very dark and evil way, and that there is possibility that vestiges of these types of movements remained within the Jewish community, and which included some of the Reform communities, the conservative communities, some of these other communities, and other secular political movements were perhaps influenced directly, not incidentally, but totally directly and intentionally, perhaps, by the Sabbateans and the Frankists throughout history. And that's a major reason why within Orthodoxy there was a pushback against Kabbalah in general, and certainly many practical Kabbalistic practices were quite often frowned upon, or sometimes would lead to suspicion as to one perhaps being a closet Sabbatean. Of course, the most famous case of this would be the famous Eibeshitz Emden controversy, which took place in the early 1700s, when the two major rabbinical figures, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz and Rabbi Yaakov Emden, had a very extreme argument, and it was a very bitter rivalry between these two that was manifested greatly because Rabbi Yaakov Emden looked at certain amulets that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz composed and distributed, that Rabbi Emden suspected to be of Sabbatean origin or of Sabbatean influence. And so we see the use of amulets, kameot, played into a major event in Jewish history, and was a major catalyst in that event, that also, and it was directly connected to an even more major event that preceded it, being this Sabbatean movement that had an enormous impact on the Jewish world and left an indelible mark upon the Jewish communities. And it all was surrounding a kameah. It was all surrounding, or several kameot, amulets, even though the use of these amulets, they're well recognized throughout the Talmud and other places, and other segulot and other things And so we discussed kishuf. We discussed, there's probably no doubt that this term kishuf, although it is a catch-all term that includes many different forms of sorcery and black magic, that anything that comes under that umbrella term kishuf is forbidden. It's not kosher. But then you have these questions of Darkei Amori. I'll give an example. There's a Mishnah that we'll look at in Shabbat, in the end of the 6th chapter of Tractate Shabbat. Let's just look at that briefly, where it mentions various items. The legal discussion there is whether or not these items may be carried on Shabbat, outside of the Eruv, etc. And the Mishnah lists several things. It says, Yotz in beveitzas hachargol. One may go out carrying the egg of a chargol, which is a species of locust, and apparently the egg from the chargol was used to treat earaches. That's what the Bartanura brings. Uveshein shel shu'al, and the tooth of a fox, which is used to treat either insomnia or oversleeping. The opposite. I'm not sure. Too much sleeping to help someone wake up, and it's the difference between a tooth of a dead fox or a tooth of a live fox. Masmer shel tzolov, or the nail from someone who was hanged or possibly crucified. Mishum refuah, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you can take these three objects with one's self out in a public domain on the Sabbath, because they're for healing purposes. Now, there's a whole question about healing on the Sabbath. The ideal is that the whatever is and actually says divrei chachamim. I think this text is not proper. So divrei Rabbi Meir v'chamim amar af b'chol aser mishum darkei amori. So he says that actually that's how the Bartanura brings it. And there's different opinions who says what, but in any event, the one opinion says you're allowed to carry these things on Shabbat because for refuah, even for healing, which again, it's a question of. However, so there's different girsot of who's saying it, whether it's Rabbi Meir or Chachamim, but in any event, Rebbe Meir says that you're allowed to. The first opinion says you're allowed to carry these things on Shabbat because they have healing. They serve a healing purpose, and the sages say, or the way the Bartanura learns it, the Rebbe Meir says, "Af b'chol aser mishum darchei amori." That even on a weekday, you're not allowed to carry these items because they're considered the ways of the Amorites. Whether it's an actual Amorite practice or not is not clear, although some would say it might have been. But the truth is, again, so what we bring out, the Rambam brings, is that if it's a bona fide practice that's been proven, it's been tested and proven to actually have a therapeutic value and to heal people, then it's permitted to do these practices. And the main prohibition against the Amorite practices is really if one does so either for no reason or to harm someone. However, the Meiri says that it's the only things that are really considered darkei amori, mishum refuah, that are permitted are things that are practical and scientific and not things that are mystical. In any event, you look at these three items that are mentioned here, I would say placing an egg of a species of a locust in one's ear to cure an earache makes sense for therapeutic value. I'm not an expert in medicine, but you could assume. So that egg of the locust makes sense. You're placing in the ear. It would seem that it would serve some sort of medicinal purpose that could be measured scientifically. But when you're talking about using a nail from someone who's crucified, or a tooth of a fox, that sounds a little bit more along the lines of superstition and magic. And yet, like we said, the Gemara says, and the halacha follows, is that if it is mishum refuah, if it's for the sake of healing, there's no prohibition to practice things that would be labeled as the ways of the Amorites, because it's healing. I think I mentioned in our first lecture there was a story of a woman who, I think, either interpreted dreams or did psychic readings or something, and she was a student of Elie Wiesel, and Elie Wiesel told her that it was okay because she was doing this to help people and not to take advantage of them, and not for personal gain and not to harm them. And I believe he was basing that on this idea of Darkei Mori Mutter Mishum Refuah, or Ein by Mishum Darkei Mori Shehu Mishum Refuah. So that's part of the story that we have here. My own experiences, I remember I worked at a farm that was kind of like a petting zoo, but a little bit more intense than a petting zoo. And there on the farm, the owner was not Jewish, but he made a program that catered to the Haredi, particularly the Hasidic Orthodox Jewish communities on the farm in the Catskills. And I would do tours of the farm. I'd do the tour in Yiddish often. And at the end of the tour, he would show a fox that he had caught that was attacking his chickens. I believe even killed a peacock that he had, a very expensive item that he lost, expensive animal that he lost to the foxes. And he caught the fox in the fox trap near the chicken coop and shot it. And he keeps the fox in the freezer. And he actually, for $20, he'll take a wrench and pull out the tooth from the fox, and he'll sell you a fox's tooth, shein shul shemeis, and that would be a segula or treatment for someone who can't wake up in the morning, or rather for someone who can't sleep, for someone who suffers from insomnia. And the other way, if you take from the living fox, that's for someone who can't wake up in the morning. And so I see this as something that's still practiced certainly in Hasidic communities. It's mentioned openly in the Talmud that such a thing exists. It is mentioned as something that's controversial, but it's accepted if it actually is there, mishum refuah. So things like that we find within, although again, it seems like the Meiri would prohibit such a thing. And it's hard to say whether something like this is in the realm of Darkei Amori or a Segula, or really, the truth is they're a little bit of both. There's some intersectionalism between these various things. We went through the various oppositions to magic, including the very famous Rambam about the mezuzah. If you'll remember, we spoke about how the Ari HaKadosh, Rabbi Isaac Luria, opposed making kameot, and how the Baal Shem Tov in his life did make kameot and kind of changed his mind on it, and pretty much took on, not in the Protestant sense, but the sola fide approach to say that by faith alone one may be saved, not saved from original sin, but rather the story which we said about the Baal Shem Tov, although we could make similarities between other traditions. He walked on water to save his life, but he did it more than once. And the first time he did it through magic, and the second time he did it through faith, and by faith alone. And similarly, the other future Hasidic masters had similar ideas. Certainly, Chabad strongly opposes these types of things, kameot and things like that, and Rabbi Nachman of Breslov as well, to a certain extent, although he also encouraged other segulot. I know the Pittsburgher Rebbe, who just passed away a few weeks ago, who I remember very well, and spent some time visiting him on a few occasions, Zechron Levracha. He would give out as a segula a piece of jewelry with the letter Hey on it. He would sell it or give it away, and it's brought that this is something that that Nachmanides, the Ramban, encouraged, as well as Rabbi Nachman, that the letter Hey on a piece of jewelry, not the Chai, not the Ches, but the Hey, is something that's valuable, and I know the Pittsburgher Hasidim, they follow this idea. And that brings us to the kosher forms of magic that we discussed in our third lecture. And we mentioned, different types of faith healing, different types of segulot for protection, and even herbs and crystals, things that you find in other forms of ritual magic, healing arts, alchemy, and so forth, were practiced in the Jewish community, and still to this day. Like I mentioned, the rue herb, my Rebbe, the Kalver Rebbe, he should be well encouraged very strongly that people should use this herb, particularly during, as I'm recording this, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I purchased some rue actually from a Wiccan store in Texas online on Amazon, and my wife was a little concerned about that we're supporting a pagan store. And I asked the Rebbe's grandson, and he said, no, it's okay, as long as it's pure rue, it doesn't matter who you purchased it from, which is interesting. The use of crystals and metals, particularly, for example, with this story of the rue, there is an opinion that has to be cut with a silver key or a silver knife that's pure silver at a certain time of the day and a certain time of the month and so forth, for it to be most efficacious and effective, and to place it into an amulet that has certain biblical verses on it and so forth. But other crystals, both those that you find in the Choshen and things like that, that were part of our tradition, but also in general, very similar to the Wiccan approach to crystals and metals and other segulot and things like that. We find these things in the Jewish community. And again, some people oppose these practices and some people use them. Amulets are well known, and there are paper amulets, well-known amulets, they're very popular ones, and then there are less known ones that you have to get from experts. And we said that even the Rebbe, even though for the most part the Hasidim traditionally opposed many amulets, but we know that there's a tradition that's a tribute to the Baal Shem Tov of the amulet that the Yismach Moshe encouraged, and most Hasidim that I know have that, and I have that on the walls of my house. And then the other popular amulets, the paper amulets that to have Psalm 121 to protect a newborn baby from demons and Lilith demons and so forth, and even books as segulot or as amulets, books not really meant to be read. Books like the Sefer Raziel HaMalach that people just have in their home because they believe that it brings protection. And there are other herbs. Another herb, going back to herbs, another very popular herb that many Hasidim and Sephardic Jews will have in their home is the It's it called in modern Hebrew from the Arabic Zahatar, and it's in biblical Hebrew it would be called Azov. That's the biblical hyssop, and I have that in my home. We'll sometimes put it on the Shabbat table, the hyssop, and the Zohar says that chases away demons. And so I'll have, and sometimes even put it in the food, the hyssop, smell it, use it for besamim, and even just to have it there on the table. And we mentioned how my ancestor, the Chavot Yair, in the Sefer Makor Chaim, mentions, particularly on Tisha B'Av, to use garlic to chase away demons, and to put either to eat garlic or to place a necklace of garlic around the child's neck. Very similar to the types of things that you hear about garlic chasing away vampires and so forth. And you have all of these stories of in Jewish folklore, not only of the well-known angels and demons and even golems and dibukim, but even werewolves and vampires exist within the Jewish tradition, and other mystical creatures. Mermaid is not really presented as a mystical creature as much as just something that's a matter of fact, something, but it's related more of a dolphin-like as opposed to fish-like. And then other creatures, even the Bigfoot type of creature, the Adnei Asoda mentioned in the Mishnah. So all of these types of creatures you'll find in the Jewish traditions. And we were talking about books as amulets, Raziel HaMalach, which itself is controversial and is all out of order, and it's not something that's very easy to read, but in general they print it very small, and it's something people just have in their house, even sometimes on microfilm or microfiche. But then other svarim that are well known, like we said, particularly from the Hasidic svarim, the Noam Elimelech is known as a segula, particularly to put by the bed of a woman who's in labor, that she should give birth with no pain. And the Sefer Kedusha Levi is said to protect a home from fire, and really invoking the saints in that way. The Hasidic saints, very similar to Catholic and Russian Orthodox practices of invoking saints, that, somewhat how Catholics will reach out to Saint Anthony of Padua, especially if they have a lost item, and the Hasidim and the Sephardim will reach out to Elakoda Meir Neina, Rebbe Meir Balanes, Havdil, or recite a saying Amar Rabbi Binyamin. And then we even have iconography, the picture particularly of Rabbi Shaya of Karastir, someone who passed away less than 100 years ago, and his picture is said to be a segula to keep away mice and other things, and even mentioning the name of Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, or having his name printed somewhere in the home, said to protect the house and other things. And then you have various magical practices that are mentioned in going back to the times of Rishonim, in the Sefer Hasidim, and the ethical will of Rabbi Yehuda Chosid, the Tzavar of Rabbi Yehuda Chosid. You have these practices, particularly keeping a hole somewhere in the house, and that there's a danger in having the windows completely shut and stopped up, because there's nowhere for the spirits to leave. It's part of the exorcism practice of the dibuk, is believed that the dibuk will leave through a hole in the window or something, and sometimes the window will even crack if a dibuk is properly exercised. So we have these types of practices. Then we discussed the Jewish influences in non-Jewish ritual magic and other mystical and magical practices, books like the Key of Solomon. We didn't mention the books of Abraham Abramelin, the mage, also said to be a Jewish magician, and to the point where we're not so sure if this is true or not. And some say that some of these books are written by the Maharil and others, but that the abramelin cream or incense or oils are to this day used by pagan practitioners of ritual magic, something that's practiced still to this day, that is attributed to a Jewish magician, which we don't know if it's actually historically true or not. But and we mentioned even both the Christian Kabbalah with the C and the syncretic hermeneutic Hermetic Kabbalists with the Q, non-Jewish Kabbalists who are neo-pagans but embrace certain Jewish Kabbalistic ideas and practices, both magical practices and philosophical and mystical practices, including people like Aleister Crowley and Alexander Gardner and others. And how similar a lot of even Jewish practices are to ritual magic and back and forth, and some are just by coincidence and some, it would seem, are intentional, as well as the world of angels and demons, which is of course rooted in the Jewish world and in Jewish thought. And then other segulot, things that we discussed: food magic, prayer magic, scripture readings, using scripture to exorcise demons, things like going into a house and reading Psalms or reading the Book of Deuteronomy in the home. These are things that are still practiced to this day to cleanse a house of evil spirits. Sounding the shofar to cleanse the house of evil spirits, or other places, or using the shofar as an exorcism tool. Other minor exorcisms, like what we mentioned, that the Chavos Yair says that the name Eliyahu Hanavi, the name of Elijah, affects exorcisms. The Baal Shem Tov being quoted saying that the words Havadai Shmo Kein Tilato, his name is sure, so is his praise, which is from the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur hymnal liturgy, also to have a minor exorcism power to chase away demons and so forth. Going to the mikveh also to chase away demons, which and to provide an exorcism, which again we could in a way even trace back to what the Rashi says, that in the flood Noah took all the living animals onto the ark, even the demons, Rashi says, because demons would drown in the water. And so too, when we immerse in a mikveh, we don't leave any place for the demons to thrive, and so these evil spirits and demons run away upon immersing in the mikveh, in addition to the halachic ramifications of tumah and tahara, which are separate from these things, and really probably not even related directly, although only maybe superficially. And then we discussed other biblical verses, like ones that begin and end with the letter Nun, things like that, that could be used to affect the be protection from magic and from sorcery, and even reciting the Shema, which is that connects back to the whole discussion that we had about the mezuzah, using the mezuzah as a segula, as a kameya, and how the Rambam says you're not allowed to do that. Well, what about Kriyat Shema? And that's the reason why many people say that you have to say the Shema both in Arvit, in the Mariv service, in the evening service, and then again Kriyat Shema Alamita. And even if one davened Mariv early, if one recited the evening prayer early and had to recite the Shema again, you should not rely on that Shema to be your bedtime Shema, because the bedtime Shema is specifically to be a sword to kill demons and to protect you when you go to sleep. and that should not be used for the mitzvah of the Kriya Shema. It's two separate practices and devotions. This is something I learned already in high school. So that's pretty much the things that we went over here. Obviously, there's much more to discuss. I want to mention I want to give two recommendations for further reading. One, especially since again this is the pluralistic seminary, rabbinical seminary. One is from actually a Reform rabbi, Rabbi Dr. Joshua Trachtenberg. He wrote a book. It was really his thesis for his PhD, and he went on to discuss, to expand his PhD thesis. There's a book called Jewish Magic and Superstition, which he published in 1939, and you can actually find it on sacredtext.com. The whole text of this book discusses a lot about these connections and between ceremonial magic and the Jewish medieval magic and neo-paganism and so forth. Another book that I would recommend, which is not free but is available online, and this is whereas Rabbi Trachtenberg is presenting things in a strictly scholarly presentation, Rabbi Ariel Bar Tzadok, who is a scholar of magic, also is someone who is a practitioner, and a holy practitioner, strictly Orthodox, but rather out of the box. He has a website, koshertorah.com, and you can purchase on koshertorah.com certainly the ebook Protection from Evil, Shemira Meira, that discusses how to protect oneself from harmful spiritual sources, and it's a nice, easy to read book. And the third book that I would recommend, just to have a mainstream, whereas Rabbi Bar Tzadok is not the mainstream, but he's Orthodox, to have, and he believes in these practices, to have a mainstream, more Lurianic, Kabbalistic approach to magic and superstition that's a mainstream Haredi view, is a book that we mentioned a few times called Faith and Folly. The Hebrew version is Tamim Tiyeh, by Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, who's one of the leading Kabbalists today in Jerusalem. And so you have, I would highly recommend these three books. Not necessarily, obviously Rabbi Trachtenberg's book is a book that's designed to be a book of scholarship, even though, and without any agenda, is kind of the point that I'm saying there. Even if it's presented in a practical and readable manner. The other two are more books of agenda. Certainly, Protection from Evil is a book that really believes in what it's saying here and expects the reader to do so, even though it's not pushing particularly to be Jewish or any other religion, and would accept a reader from other religions and learn with them. And then you have Faith and Folly, which has a expressed and very clear bias, and a dogmatic one at that, to avoid any form of magic in any sense. And this is from a Kabbalist. And as I said before, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel opposed even having a copy of Raziel HaMalach in the house, because it said things in there that go against orthodoxy, even though it's been an accepted book for such a long time. I also wanted to conclude with one of my favorite hymns in the Jewish tradition, is the Shir HaYichud, which in medieval times was recited daily. It's a series of 7 songs, one for each day of the week, and they're rather long, but they're really like a theology lesson all in there. And the one that's for Thursday, it's not the practice really to say it today, but I try to on a daily basis. Most people only see it on the night of Yom Kippur if they see it, or in Satmar. They also, in addition to that, they'll also read it on the 7 weeks of Sfira, on the one for each Shabbat. Many Hasidic courts will sing the Shir Yuchud for Shabbat as a Zemer for Shabbat. But like I said, the one for Thursday is a question of who wrote it. It's generally, the general tradition is Rav Shmuel Chassid, who was the father of Rav Yehuda Chassid. So we're going back to 1200s. So it says, it discusses, things about God there. It's a theology lesson. And so it goes, it says, Ein gava k'mar gavasecha, af ein anava kanvasecha. There's no pride or haughtiness like your pride, and there's no humility like your humility, like God's humility. There's no holiness like your holiness, like God's holiness, and there's no closeness like your closeness, like God's closeness, which I think that's a beautiful statement there. There's no tzedakah like your tzedakah. There's no salvation like your salvation. There's no arm like your arm. There's no voice like your tremendous powers. There's no mercy like your mercies, and there's no grace like your grace. And then it says there's no godliness like your godliness, and there's nothing so wonderful like your holy name, because your names are running deer. When you're mentioned, it by mention of God's name, by mention of your name, wonderful things are accomplished. And then this is where it starts to talk about magic. That various forms of magic will not pressure you. And every magic word or holy name or spell or incantation will not conquer you. All of the sages, all the wise people never conquered you. All who practice various forms of magic were not able to conquer God or to accomplish anything against your will. You turn back the wise sages, and the sly people and the magicians are not able to win against you. It's interesting that here Rav Shmuel Chassid compares sages, men of wisdom, to magicians, which would seem to indicate that ritual magic in all of its forms is a form of chokhmah. It's a form of study. It's a science. And it's something that one could master, but it's not necessarily proper. And with all of that, nothing can go beyond the will of God. So like I said before, if doing all these things and engaging in these practices brings one to more piety and more connection to God, gesundheit. And I mean gesundheit. Please be healthy and well. But then the other thing is, when it comes to this ritual magic, so this is only because, he needs sleep there. So with this, we should come under the understanding that really everything comes from the power of God and nothing is devoid of God. And so just because something is accomplished in this mystical realm or through these superstitious practices and so forth, does not in any way take away the power of God. All we have to do, because I feel bad about this, is we have to remember to stay within the means, and then with all these things we have to recognize that nothing is more powerful than God, which goes without saying, and all of these things that we consider to be magic are really totally natural and part of this world, including the psychological world. And with that being said, ultimately we should follow the advice that's attributed to King Solomon in the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. Seif davar kol nishma ki mirevitz mitzvah shmar ki zeh kol adam. The last thing, when all has been said and done, everything's been listened to, fear God and keep His commandments, because that's the entirety of the human condition. We should all be worthy indeed to fear God and to keep His commandments, not let these practices worry one, and if one has no interest in this, to really probably try to stay away from them. But if one wants to engage in certain permitted traditional practices, not for the purpose of any conjuring or anything, but rather simply to serve God, I also don't see what's wrong with that. And so let's try to find, like we said, like King Solomon said, Seif davar, the end word is Elokim Yerevitz mitzvaysav shmar ki zeh kol adam, to fear God and keep His mitzvot, because that's the entirety of the human experience. We should all be worthy to these things and to be brought back home to Jerusalem, and you don't have to move your leg here. Oh, but I like some of the guys. There was one guy who. So thank you for watching. If you have my email address, you have any questions, you can please answer me. Some free cookies. So, God willing, we shall be protected from God above, and if God wants us to use these various forms of protection and healing, just like they're really no different than any other form of medicine, other than what have we figured out yet. And with this, God should bless us, bless this country, and bless the whole world with peace and harmony. Alright, thank you for watching. We shall be blessed with all the best. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you know how to contact me. All the best. Thank you.